Hi everyone. I'm going to unmute everyone that's on here. Why not? Okay. All right. Um, all right. We're gonna hold off from unmuting everyone until the Q&A session and just go through our agenda items first. So we'll give ourselves introductions so that everyone knows who's on the line, and then we'll go through a program overview and as well as a Department of Conservation history and roles piece, and then we'll go through the application, which will be the main portion of this webinar. So my name is Greta Seuss. I work at OPR, and I am one of the managers for this program.
And hi, I'm Michael McCormick with Governor's Office of Planning and Research, and thank you for joining us on the Sustainable Communities Planning Grant and Incentives Program's Best Practices Pilot webinar.
Good morning, everyone. This is David Thessell. I'm a program manager for the Sustainable Communities Planning Grants for the Department of Conservation.
And later joining us will likely be Allison Joe of the Strategic Growth Council.
And just a quick note, if you want to get in contact with us before we open up the call for questions, please enter any questions you have into the chat box so that we can see them, and we'll attempt to reply to them as we go through the presentation. And obviously, if there's some questions that come up that fit better later on in the presentation, we'll hold those to that most appropriate time. Those questions that do come up that we don't have questions or answers for now, we will be posting answers for on the website after the webinar is over.
And just a reminder that this webinar will be posted on the main grant page for this program on SGC's website, and applications are due on February 9th. So Michael will go ahead and give a quick overview of the program and its purpose and objectives.
Great, thank you, Greta. So this program comes from quite a few years of experience that SGC and OPR has had on doing outreach to our local partners and regional partners around the state, knowing that there's resource constraints, capacity constraints, and technical knowledge constraints. This is funded through the Safe Drinking Water, Water Quality and Supply, Flood Control, River, and Coastal Protection Bond Act of 2006, more commonly and affectionately known as Prop 84. And this is a framework for ongoing state support for local implementation and the creation of useful resources and tools to help all of California's communities implement their land use planning efforts. So this is intended to support a component of a plan or implementation effort. We acknowledge that, and we'll get to this a little bit later, the funding amount would not typically fund a full plan or program. This is really meant to help local governments and regional partners get over the threshold to being able to do more of a best practice rather than necessarily a standard practice, and to really leverage these funds to do great work that is considered a best practice that could be potentially scaled or leveraged in other ways around the state to support work. We're intending to help our partners implement projects or plans, and then create replicable case studies. And obviously, this is OPR. If you've engaged with us in the past, we provide ad hoc technical guidance throughout the state. And this is intended to help formalize some of that ad hoc technical guidance and link up with some of the other programs that OPR is developing to support integrated climate adaptation and resiliency programs, both locally and throughout the state. So a number of objectives of the program. So we have policy development guidance, technical assistance, and implementation support that OPR will be giving directly to grant recipients. This is a little different from most SGC programs and other grant programs from the state, in that we're going to be engaging through this formalization of the ad hoc guidance much more closely with our partners in this grant program. So we truly want to be a partner in this and identify how we can facilitate connections to resources and support across state agencies, and also understand where that guidance and support maybe isn't functioning as well as it should, so that the work that we're doing through this grant program can feed back into the state system and we can improve our resources for our local and regional partners throughout the state. It's also intended to provide a consistent template methodology for documenting and sharing replicable case studies. So we've run a couple of beta test jurisdictions last year to identify what a template might look like for case studies, and so we're using that and leveraging that for the work through this program. We're intended to roll up these pilots into case studies that will be posted on the OPR website, and will hopefully be fed into other policy and program initiatives like the general plan guidelines and others to help inform other local partners and regional partners around the state.
And I just want to let folks know that have joined the call. Since we started the discussion, Michael just gave a quick overview of the purpose and objectives of the program. And along with Michael McCormick, David Thissell, and myself, Greta Seuss, we now have Allison Joe from the Strategic Growth Council. So we'll move on to the application overview for now. This application, it has two components. The first component is the online survey that contains the threshold requirements and short answer questions. And aside from that, there's 5 separate documents that will need to be sent to the SCPGIP email by February 9th, and that includes the proposal summary, the civic engagement plan for disadvantaged community applicants, and the indicators and tracking in progress, which those 3 will be scored, and then the work plan and budget documents will also need to be submitted, but will not be scored for these purposes. The short answer questions, I'll just go through them on these slides. So the first question is for, there's two types of questions. One is for all applicants, and then the second is for disadvantaged community applicants only. And then the elements of the project also need to be described in question 2, and then the organizational capacity, and these questions are all scored. We'd also like to know the level of technical assistance that would be useful or helpful to successfully complete the project. And question 5 goes through the local plan alignment. So this is a few-part question that lists the local or regional plans and then describes the opportunities and identifies how the project will increase consistency with those plans. So again, aside from the questions that I just went through that are on the online survey, there are 5 document submissions that are required, 3 of which will be scored and 2 of which are not, which are the work plan and budget. And all attachments should be prepared in the specific, the 12-inch font and margins no less than 1 inch. These submissions are the proposal summary, which is outlined in the application itself, the guidelines. The civic engagement plan is the second document, and this is only applicable to disadvantaged communities. The civic engagement plan is outlined in the application as well, and it's only required for those that are applying as disadvantaged communities as defined by the Kallenbauer Screen 2.0, and is not required by the applicants that are qualified under the median household income disadvantaged community Prop 84 definition. The third document that needs to be submitted is the indicators and tracking progress. So this is just an exercise that we're having folks go through to make sure that they're tracking what their project is going to be, what their outcome is going to be from the project, and we have a list of indicators in the guidelines that we'd like folks to choose from, and then fill out this table and submit that, which will be scored. And then the fourth and fifth submissions are the work plan and the budget plan. So again, these are there are templates for these in the guidelines. The work plan, if you can see the yellow highlighted spot, that will be the amount that the applicant is requesting from the program. And then just a note about the requirements upon the award. We've got a kickoff meeting where all participants will need to be there, and then we'll go through our refined work plan requirements at that meeting. And these more refined work plans will be due a month from the kickoff meeting. So that's just a little bit more refinement of the plans. And then these are just some frequently asked questions that we've got thus far. And I guess we could open it up for questions. Michael or Allison, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Greta. Yeah, so this is an exciting opportunity to institutionalize some of the work that everybody's been doing out in the field, and to also test some innovative ideas on coordination and implementation. With a maximum grant award of up to $50,000, as I mentioned earlier in the call, this is not intended to plan and to fund an entire general plan or policy document. It's really intended to focus on a subset of implementation items or program objectives that you'd like to accomplish that fits into that category of a best practice. And obviously the word best practice is relative, and we've seen a broad variety of potential ideas coming in. And some of the questions that we've received is, one is, can a pilot applicant partner with a private developer? And yes, we encourage partnerships in applications. The lead on the application needs to be an eligible funding entity, which is included in the grant application packet. Are NGOs eligible to apply? No, but they can also be a partner with an eligible applicant. Another question is, what proportion of the overall $250,000 is going to disadvantaged communities? And the answer to that was a minimum of 75% of the total available funds as well. Another question is, can a jurisdiction submit more than one application? And one application is allowed per jurisdiction or agency. So that's something to keep in mind. Make sure you're communicating with your partners within the jurisdiction and in the community to make sure that only a single applicant is coming in per jurisdiction. And then the next question is, when will grants be awarded from this round? From date of completion. So we're unmuting the line now. So if anybody has any questions, if you could ask your question, and if you're not on the call, if you're not wanting to ask a question, if you could please mute your line, that would be really helpful for us. We want to make sure that we have so just a heads up that if you have some background noise, if you could mute your line, that would be great, and that way we can unmute everybody. If not, we're going to have to mute individual people, and that's a little bit harder to do logistically. So Greta, are we going to be able to unmute everybody, or is there a little too much background noise?
I'm not sure that we can unmute everyone. Perhaps we should use the chat tool for folks to ask questions.
Okay, well, all right, so if you have some questions, why don't you ask those questions in the chat box, and those will go to the entire audience, so just be aware of that, so that any questions that are being asked in the chat box are going to appear. And so if you go to the bottom right-hand corner of your control, there should be an option to open the chat box. So we don't have any questions yet. So Allison, Abe, would you like to
Yeah,
add anything?
while we're waiting for some questions in the chat, I would just like to, some of you may be wondering what the Department of Conservation has to do with a program such as this. And so just to give a little background, my division, the Division of Land Resource Protection, is primarily concerned with the preservation of agricultural land. And we have a number of grant programs to support that. And in particular, we've been managing grants specifically for a number of years. And then in 2010, we were appropriated funds to manage the Sustainable Communities Planning and Incentives Grant Program, which was funded through Prop 84, on behalf of SGC. So we've been doing that, like I said, since 2010. And that was, as many of you know, or maybe recipients of some of these grants, was approximately $70 million for over 3 rounds. And those rounds we've gone through 3 rounds now, and those funds are wrapping up. And this partnership with OPR for this program is a perfect outcome and next step of these of the funding, this Prop 84 funding. So just so you were clear, in the future when the actual contracts are made, your jurisdiction, if you're successful, will have a contract with the Department of Conservation, and we're managing this on behalf of the Strategic Growth Council. I think we're going to be doing it in a similar fashion where a recommendation is developed and presented to the council, and the council ultimately approves these grants. So,
yeah, so this is Allison with SGC. Just as similarly to the Prop 84 planning, the larger planning grant program that we had a few years ago, these would be the grants, the application. The program is administered by the Department of Conservation, and so all of the paperwork and the back-end coordination is really handled by conservation, and then programmatically, staff at OPR are the leads on that. So that's why the multi-agency effort. Any decisions or recommendations from staff would be approved by the Strategic Growth Council later this spring, and so we would have there's a formal approval of your award. I think that, and so those of you who are familiar with our planning grant programs are pretty familiar with this. One of the things I definitely want to encourage and maybe clarify, there's a lot of questions around partnerships and applications and applicants, and really being very clear about who is eligible to submit their name as the applicant for this application. We have statutorily some pretty very specific parameters, and so we wanted to make sure that's clear. However, partnerships with others, including NGOs, other nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations, is highly encouraged. So while you wouldn't be a direct applicant, you could be a partner that could, and we could, and you would have to clarify kind of the relationships of the different participating entities on your application. But we have to make sure that there's at least a city, county, a regional transportation planning agency, joint powers authority, council of government. One of those entities has to be the applicant, the person that signs the contract.
Thanks, Allison.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that was helpful. So we've gotten some questions on the chat. And so the first one is that if we have a slide with names and contact info of the presenters. So oh yeah, there we go. There it is. So Michael and I are the main points of contact for this grant program, and the email that goes directly to us both is the scpgip@opr.ca.gov email. So you can send all your questions there, and we check that daily and are pretty responsive. The next question is, how many applications do we anticipate receiving? I think that we have decided on a good guesstimate of maybe 60 on the high end. But you know, this is the first time that we've done this program, so it's sort of a
it's kind of up to you how many applications we end up receiving. So we would hope that you consider this as an option. I think we had a much shorter time frame for to submit the application, and with a longer time frame, we might see a few more applications come forward. And we're, I think the thought is, if you think that something is worth funding and fits within this program as a potential best practice, we would love to see your application. Even if you're not sure it's a best practice, that would be something that we would encourage. If it's not a best practice for, or it might be for a community of your size or type, that's also something to really think about, because we're looking at a pretty broad range of jurisdictions that plan in this state. So trying to get a really good mix and cross section of applicants is really important to us. We'll work on what happens once we receive all the applications.
Yeah, and another point is the application work that you do, even if you aren't awarded the funding, is going to be helpful for us to see what's happening around the state, and we're going to be taking that information and potentially connecting with grant applicants after the awards to see if we can continue to support a number of those applications anyway, even though they may not have funding associated with them. We do want to provide technical support and capacity support wherever we can, understanding that we have our own limitations, but we're really excited to see forward movement at our local and regional partners, and want to continue supporting that however we can.
The next question that we have, I've been reading this and I'm not sure I understand the question, but I'll read it out loud. Since we know that the Prop 84 definition of disadvantaged communities is limited, can we make the case that our actual disadvantaged community can qualify for the 75% of the total? So I will start an answer to that question with just going through quickly the disadvantaged community requirements. So 75% of the funds must go to a disadvantaged community as defined by Cal Enviroscreen 2.0. Aside from that 75%, 25% up to 25% is allowed to go to communities that are suffering from drought impacts. The other caveat of this disadvantaged community focus is that we are giving priority to the Prop 84 definition of the median household income definition, which is, I believe, 49,000 median household income. And that's also detailed in the guidelines. I hope that answered your question. I could try to unmute one person. It's really difficult because it's not...
So, Greta, I'm happy to take a stab at this, because I know that there's a lot of definitions of disadvantaged communities out there where the SGC is has worked very closely with the Cal EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, as well as OEHA in working through Cal Enviroscreen and disadvantaged community identification. We know that there are lots of communities on the ground that that fit into various classifications or definitions of disadvantaged or underserved or communities of concern. That is a really challenging thing. What we are looking at for this program, again, to clarify, we are looking at dedicating 75% of the funds available in this pilot to go to those who are in the top 25% of Cal Enviroscreen 2.0. Also recognizing that that OEHA released Enviroscreen 3.0 the other day, earlier this week. But 75% have to go to those within the top 25% under Enviroscreen. Up to, so 25% of the funds go to communities suffering from drought impacts or communities that lack access to safe drinking water. And so that's a focused proposal specific to safe drinking water concerns. And then on top of that, the additional priority, because that's this is really an important distinction with this program as opposed to some of the other greenhouse gas reduction funds and things like that. the Prop 84 definition and qualification of median household income related to median household income is layered on top as priority on top of the existing disadvantaged community identification. So if your community is not identified as a disadvantaged community by EnviroScreen 2.0, you would probably be less competitive for this and is not part of the community that is suffering from drought impacts. It does not mean that we would not fund a non-disadvantaged community, but what we would do is give priority to disadvantaged communities as defined by our program. If you're looking to try to justify or make the case for funding your program or your plan in your community, I would use the other characteristics of your community but incorporate that into the scoring component more than anything, I would say. There's not an additional consideration for additional disadvantaged characteristics, and so that's where you will be most competitive if you can think about how to frame your project or your plan to reflect the needs of your community.
Awesome. Thanks, Allison. We'll move on to the next question. I will read it aloud. Would a fire hazard overlay project be considered eligible? This would be to establish a special zoning district to protect structures and city residents from the potential hazards associated with wildland fires.
Just from that short description, it's hard to fully identify whether it'd be eligible or not. I think from the short description, it seems like it would fit. Ultimately, you want to go through the criteria and identify how it meets that criteria and scored in comparison to competing proposals. But that does it doesn't seem like there would be anything that would preclude that kind of proposal.
Thanks, Michael. We've got another question about whether the webinar is going to be posted online, and yes, it will be. It'll be on the SCPGIP SGC page, and will also be sent out via email today and later this week, most likely.
And what can we send a follow-up to the attendees? Do we have email lists that we can?
Yes.
So let's send out the web link as well. I think it's we omitted that on this web slide, so we'll be able to send that to all the attendees as long as you inputted your web address when you signed into the webinar.
Awesome. All right, the last question that we have right now is fairly long, but I could read it out loud.
Well, I think really specific questions about project applications we could probably take on a case-by-case basis. I think we could probably go down the rabbit's hole of answering very detailed questions on the webinar. I think we're really looking at generally providing feedback on the program as a whole rather than specific project questions. Greta and I are both available through that email address that's on your screen right now to have specific conversations about projects and project eligibility. And that'll be a lot easier way for us to be much more specific about what might or might not be eligible.
I would say, just Michael, for this example, I'm reading the question. It might be great to summarize it as an idea. Part of some of the challenge with this program is that it's new and there's not a great list of ideas to point to unless there is, and so it might be useful to actually just describe and just say, is this something that would be, is that something fundable, and without getting into the details. I think that would be helpful. The question on the hazard example was another really good one, because this one is actually very different from that, so it would be helpful.
So it's really about whether the grant can be used to increase green space capacity through partnerships with private landowners, and urban greening is certainly fundable through Prop 84. we'd want to see if it's just funding something that would already be moving forward. I think that it would be eligible, but would it be competitive? And I think that's the larger question. There's plenty of eligible projects. This is a very broad grant program, and I know with limited funds, a relatively limited number of funded entities. So I think the larger question isn't necessarily whether it's eligible, but whether it's competitive in a larger sense. And so looking at really, is this truly a best practice? And if, in this particular case, I think there's a lot of examples through SGC's urban greening program of work that's been done out there. If something exceeds some of the expectations through that grant program, I think that would be something to look at as an example.
Other questions?
There are no other questions at this point.
Great. Well, we'll leave the line open for a few more minutes to see if there's any other questions that come in. As Greta said, Greta and this is Michael McCormick, we are both available for questions if you email the scpgip@opr.ca.gov email address. We'll get back to you within 24 hours. And if there's a more detailed discussion we should have, then we will set up a phone call to connect with you as well. And we will be posting this webinar on the website after the completion. We'll also be responding to the questions that came in writing and posting those as well. And as mentioned earlier, we'll be circulating that website address to the attendees through the email addresses they supplied and all of you supplied when you were signing into the webinar. So seeing that there aren't any new additional questions, I think we'll leave it open for about another minute and then close the webinar. Thank you all for attending today. We're really looking forward to getting some amazing proposals and working with all of you and potentially even some of you who submit proposals that don't receive the funding to continue the great work that's happening throughout the state on climate and land use. So have a great day and stay dry.